Hello, and welcome to Book Circle. I'm Earl Weinberg. This time we will continue our reading of The Demon Priest by Jim Burroughs. Our protagonist, Father Samuel Gregory, is once again trying to sort relations out with his new neighbors. Or maybe these aren't neighbors. All three of us turned and looked to see what it was. From where we were standing in the cloister, a lot of the view of the west lawn was blocked by the church. The chapel was directly between us and the street. Still, we could see that a couple of cars had driven up over the curb onto the sidewalk. One was even sitting on the west lawn. A whole bunch of guys were piling out. They looked like the punks that had hassled Selena and me, or maybe the thugs that worked for Dr. Apollo the other day. Father Gregory brushed the other priest aside and dashed down the cloister, across the porch, and onto the south lawn. Man, can he move when he wants to. I tried, but I couldn't keep up. He was like twice as fast as I could run. By the time I'd crossed the porch, he was slowing down on the south lawn just beyond where the chapel sticks out. The thugs that I could see were marching across the west lawn. They had bats and pipes and chains. There's some really comfortable benches on the west lawn in front of the main entrance, and people tend to gather there. I couldn't see who. They were on the other side of the chapel and the church, but someone screamed, well, kind of yelped just then. "Can I help you?" the father called out. The thugs, at least the ones I could see, turned and headed his way. I was walking kind of slow down the west side of the cloister and was beginning to be able to see more of the area in front of the church. The father was just about even with its west wall. I still couldn't see the woman when she yelped again. "Shut up!" cried an angry voice. "I recommend that you leave her alone," said Father Gregory, turning a bit to his right. "Don't worry about her. You got troubles of your own," said this big guy in front of the father, tapping a piece of pipe against his left hand. I slowed down even more as I stepped out of the cloister and got an even better look at all the creeps on the lawn and the scared people by the benches. "You should put that down," said Father Gregory, still walking toward the scared woman, just like the big guy with the pipe wasn't there or didn't matter. In fact, he made a kind of dismissing gesture with his left hand. As he did, the guy swung the pipe right at him, but somehow their wrists collided and the pipe missed the father completely. Another guy off to the right flipped one of those Filipino butterfly knives open and jumped at Father Gregory, who kind of twisted and stepped out of the way, so the knife guy stabbed the one with the pipe. There was a whole lot of yelling and running and screaming at that point. A bunch of the thugs charged the father. One grabbed the woman who yelped. Several other people tried to run away, and one or two of them got grabbed. About that time, some guy came out of nowhere to my left and grabbed at me. Someone screamed, and I tried to bat him away. I missed some of what happened next. I was struggling with the guy who had grabbed my left wrist to keep him from getting my right. I could see, though, that the father was surrounded, and there were a couple of thugs on the ground by his feet. I slapped my guy as hard as I could, making his face kind of bluish, and caught another glimpse of Father Gregory. "Uh-oh," said a voice. One of the thugs had grabbed a lady, one of the church ladies who'd been singing hymns, and was threatening her with a knife. And as I caught sight of the father, he was rushing to the rescue, and boy was he angry. Red angry with horns and a tail angry. And right out in the open, in the middle of the day, red with horns and a tail angry. And the thug didn't have a chance. He tried to move before the father got to him, but before he could, he was flying through the air. Father Gregory had just rushed in and backhanded him. Someone screamed. People were running into the church or away down the streets, or at least most of the good ones did. A few were trapped by bad guys, and T.C. and Selena were running toward the troubles to rescue the ones that were trapped or too scared to run away. One of the thugs pulled a gun when he saw T.C. running at him. "No way," said T.C., and he made some kind of gesture with his hand and just kept coming. The thug pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. It just clicked. He tried a couple more times before T.C. decked him. I don't think any of the thugs were metas. They were no match for Father Gregory, T.C., and Selina, even though there were more of them. Pretty soon we could hear sirens headed our way. One of the thugs yelled, "Clear out!" and most of them jumped into cars. A few left on foot. 6 or 7 of them just lay on the ground back where the father, T.C., and Selina had clobbered them. As the 2 cars were leaving, T.C. made another gesture, and they swerved into each other with a big crash. "Let the police handle them," I heard the father tell T.C. "All right." That's about when the cops started showing up. I turned to look at the father, and I was glad to see him looking, normal. I didn't think the cops would have liked him the other way. Like he did back in the warehouse, Father Gregory stood with his arms out at his side. This time, though, he was holding them lower and more casual and priest-like. Like he was welcoming the cops or blessing them or something. T.C. and Selina and I all joined him and held our hands out where they could be seen too. Not like, we surrender, but more, see, they're empty. Some of the cops rounded up a few of the thugs that were trying to escape, while others started checking out the ones lying on the ground and in the cars. Ambulances and EMTs and even a fire truck showed up, and so did that Inspector McGarry. He told one of the policemen, a lieutenant I think, to secure the thugs and came over to take charge of us himself. "You seem to attract trouble, Father." "We were just minding our business, Inspector, when these individuals showed up. I believe I may have seen 1 or 2 of them at the warehouse." "Wouldn't shock me. Some of these are from the same gang as some of the ones we took into custody then." "They may harbor a grudge." "Yeah, I'm going to need statements again from you folk and the witnesses." "Several took sanctuary in the church." McGarry nodded to a couple of cops to go in and check it out. "I assume it's okay with you, Father, if they go inside?" "Of course, Inspector." "There was an interesting claim on one of the 911 calls," said McGarry. "Really?" "Yeah, something about a demon. A demon and a priest, or a priest who was a demon. The caller was pretty rattled." "I imagine that this attack was rather frightening to a good many who witnessed it." "Will you be taking him into custody, Inspector?" asked someone behind us. I turned to see. It was the angry priest. Of course. "I'm sorry, sir, and you would be?" the inspector asked the pesky priest. "I'm Reverend Warren Schiller from the diocese." "And your part in all of this, Reverend Schiller?" A bystander. I had nothing to do with this dreadful event." "I see. Did you see Father Gregory do something that would warrant my taking him in? Or were you coming on his behalf?" The inspector shrugged. "As a character witness, say?" No, most certainly not. Just a concerned citizen, though I will say that I am not entirely convinced of the gentleman's bona fides." "Really? And why would that be?" "The church has no record of a living priest called Samuel Gregory." "I see. So you suspect that he may be an impostor, passing himself off as someone he's not?" I cannot say so with surety, but I have every reason to distrust him, and to recommend that you investigate him thoroughly. Now, if you have no further need of me?" "Unless you have some solid evidence, then yes, you may go." The angry priest headed around back to the parking lot, and the inspector turned back to us. "So you're not in good graces with the diocese, Father?" "Not with that priest, at least. Will you be needing me further? I would like to see to those who took shelter in my church." Inspector McGarry gave the father a really strange look, then shrugged and said, "Well, I haven't seen or heard anything to hold you on. The DA will still be wanting to see you, though." He gestured toward the father's ankle. "Of course, I'm at your service." The inspector turned to oversee the other cops, and the father and I headed toward the church. T.C. and Selina came along with us. Inside, we found about a dozen of the neighborhood folk and 4 or 5 cops. They were gathered in little knots, talking softly. As we stepped into the nave, Henri spotted us and came down from the choir. "How is everyone, Henri?" "Pretty scared, sir." "I understand." Looking around, we could see that some of the neighbors were looking at the father, a bit relieved, and others seemed even more nervous now than when he'd arrived. I expect that what everybody's seen may have left them with a number of questions. Henri nodded agreement. Would you be willing to put out the word that I will be available to answer any questions they or our neighbors have this evening, say, at 7 o'clock? Yes, sir, Henri replied. T.C., Selina, do you think you could help him get the word out? They both answered yes. Thank you, and thank you for your assistance out there. And with the punks this afternoon, Selina, I added. What? A handful of 'em tried to grab me on the way to the household. Selina sent 'em running. And you think they were the same crew? One or two of 'em were. This will not do. He turned around and went back out to speak to the inspector. Inspector McGarry? Yes, Father? I just learned that my assistant and our friend were attacked on the street. Further, it would appear that in both cases, and here minions of that Dr. Apollo were involved. I see. Officer, will you come take the young lady's statement? Go on, Father. I have invited those from the neighborhood to come by this evening if they have questions for me. I would appreciate it if you could provide at least a modicum of protection starting before 7. He paused and looked out at the many reporters and news vans being held back from St. Michael's property by police lines. And perhaps you could also protect our privacy. My intention is to answer candidly my neighbors' concerns, not to feed controversy and unrest. I will see what we can do. Thank you, Inspector. You may have to face the press if you leave St. Michael's, though. You are within your rights not to welcome them on your property, but in the public ways, understood. Thank you again. Retrospective 3, Missions, 1925. Years passed before the unorthodox bishop once again met the priestly devil in dreams. Eventually, though, Sam walked into the pub and found Al sitting at their usual booth. You look like hell, my friend, said the bishop, looking up from his cups. Funny you should say that, said the devil in priestly garb. You're looking somewhat worse for wear yourself. Am I? Even here, he sighed. You'd think I could at least dream of normality. The devil looked down at his red hands. I'm sorry. Perhaps I was wrong to appear like this. He gestured, sweeping his hand over his visage, and took the human form he had been ordained in. This does make it easier to sit, he joked, taking his seat in their customary booth. It's not your fault, said the bishop. It's my own. Was careless of me. Been here a while, have you? Long enough for quite a few pints. I suppose I have. Wasn't counting. What's wrong, sir? The bishop asked the priest, as Betty the barmaid sent a pipe before him. Al sighed hugely, and after a notable silence, questions got asked, and I couldn't lie. Questions? The bishop shrugged. I took a few shortcuts, he said, and they were noticed. Shortcuts? With your ordination. Didn't run it by the committee. Did it all on my own. Skipped your being interviewed. Couldn't have you lie. Couldn't have you tell the truth. But, yeah, we stretched the truth at the seminary, cut small corners making you a deacon. But we didn't outright lie, nor fully confess. If I'd done it proper, making you a priest, formed the committee, had you examined, it'd be one or the other. He shrugged and stared into his nearly empty glass. So I just skipped it all. Just did the private ceremony. I thought that was within your purview as bishop. Even the bishops got rules. They noticed. You were gone. They couldn't find you. That led them to investigate your past. It was a little thin. So they asked, demanded the truth from me. What could I do? I told them everything. Everything. About me, whom and what I am. Yeah, all of it. Betty, another. Should you, sir? Should I? Should I hear? Just a dream. Not really drunk, just dreaming of it. I have told them? I had to. They knew I was being evasive, demanded the truth, the whole truth. I'm a bishop. Why did the church? About holy orders? A sacrament? Thank you, Betty. What was their reaction? Well, either I was crazy, delusional, or it was true. And that'd make it heresy and blasphemy and me crazy for going with it. So I'm crazy. It's official. And suspended. Can't have a crazy bishop going around. Can't defrock me. We're not Romish. So they could inhibit, suspend, or depose me. They didn't want a lot of questions and harassment. So they suspended me quietly and explained that I was unwell. Gave me a stipend for my care and years of service, and so I wouldn't need to get a job. Mostly qualified to teach. Didn't want me teaching. I'm so sorry, Alan. I never thought. I would never... It's okay, Sam. It was my fault. You only asked. I didn't have to go along with it. It's my choice, my fault, not yours. You didn't know about church rules and all. Enough about me. How's your mission going? How's it going? Damn if I know, Al, said the devil. Some of this and some of that. I suppose I could be a little less drunk if you need me to listen. It is kind of pitiful, a bishop dreaming his way out of prohibition, even a suspended one. St. Augustine wouldn't approve. It might help. It was hard getting here, and I was hoping for your sagely advice. Sagely advice, eh? In vino veritas has been more my way here for a while. Let's see. Al shook his head. Perhaps if we went for a walk, I could dream of being sober somewhere else. Al stood a bit unsteadily and left the usual antique coins on the table for Betty. Sam followed him out of the pub and down the winding street of Old Whitcomb with its stone buildings and heavy thatched roofs. As they passed the Buttercross, the bishop stopped to admire the hominess of the market square with its pubs, tea room, and bookstores. Never been here to Whitcomb, not in reality, he observed. Replied the devil. I thought we were in Somerton. The bishop shrugged and continued across the street to the tree-lined path leading to the church. Well, he said, we're in Dream after all. I suppose we could be in both. They arrived to find the church open but empty. Al was now wearing the purple shirt and white collar of a bishop. They stopped and sat in one of the pews. So upon what were you seeking my sagely advice, Sam? Well, I'd always conceived my mission as directed toward the other Gregory, others of my particular kind. And I'm having very little success with them. They do not contemplate or dream of redemption, or dream of anything for that matter. I can find no handle to do as you did for me. If it were easy, my friend, mightn't it have happened already in all those eons you spoke of? Yes, and I knew that as I started out. I just somehow felt that I ought to try, that if it worked for me, if you could persuade me to change for the better, then shouldn't I strive to do the same? And you have found no one who is interested in listening to you? Not precisely. Oh? None of the Gregory. But we are not the only fallen bound in those realms. So you found someone, a fallen angel or the like, but not one of the Gregory that you might save? That may overstate it somewhat. I encountered someone who does not shut me out entirely, merely for claiming to have slipped my bonds, to have found absolution. I see. But there is a problem? Yes, with what you would call my calling. I envisioned it as being about reaching out to others like myself. There are powers that bound us, and they declared us bound for all time, bound by the will of God. That I cast off my bindings, I took that as evidence that other Gregory can and therefore should be helped, rescued. But what of the other fallen? Am I supposed to reach out to others, those not like me, whose errors, sins, crimes were different? We have it on excellent authority that the second great commandment is to love our neighbors as ourselves. Exactly, but who is our neighbor? Am I to try to save everyone, even those who fell in the great rebellion? Or was that unforgivable? Are there bounds as to who is my neighbor, whom I might rightly save? A question that I've asked myself, Sam. After all, did he not teach us in the parable of the Good Samaritan that all are our neighbors, even our enemies and those who were despised? And my answer got me suspended and called mad. I have never been sure about ministering to non-humans, neighbors, those not like me, very not like me. Much of what I thought I knew said no, but there you were. That begs the question, does it follow that there are no limits as to whom one should help? And if not, then how do you know what the limits are and what you should do? I would say that you should trust your heart, except that if I've understood you correctly, you only have a heart and a body because you chose to. You became flesh, and in any event, science tells us the heart is only a pump for circulating blood. Should I say instead your instincts? Does a spiritual being even have instincts? I guess that what you must trust is that which makes you yourself. Sam looked puzzled. Alan continued. When you could not turn your back on the dying, the victims of war, famine, and pandemic, something in you was speaking to you. You could not be you and fail to act. All I can advise is to trust that. Is that what you did? Yes. How did it work for you? I am ostracized and prevented from performing the duties of my calling. So would you do it again? The bishop smiled sadly and nodded. Yes, Sam, he said, I would still tell you to repent, and I would shrive and baptize and ordain you. And I would even tell the truth about what I did. I would not change any of that, even knowing what it would cost you. Yes. What it means to me is that I have learned about and experienced God's creation. I have learned things about faith, hope, and charity that I never expected, that I could not have learned any other way. What about you? If you knew reaching out would go badly for you, would you do it? Yes. That's not my question. It's not that I fear the wrath of the powers that bound me. The question is, would it be wrong for me to try? I wasn't conceiving those as separate questions. You helped me to undo my binding, my punishment. It feels down into my very core, my heart, if you will, that you were right to do it. It's the old question, Sam. Do we do the right for fear of punishment, for hope of reward, or because it is right? Fear isn't righteousness. Seeking reward isn't. Or the other old conundrum, said Sam. Is it right because it is God's will, or does God will it because it is right? And are your great powers always consonant with God's will and the right? Is questioning them questioning Him? And so, are we saying that I should take the risk that the powers object to my interference and try to save any that will listen to my message? Gregory, fallen angel, demon, fae, or human? If that's where your heart leads you. You're a brave man, Alan. I do what I must, what I can live with. I suppose then that I can do no less. For several years after that, the two continued to meet at the pub or the Church in Dream, where Sam would tell the bishop of his adventures as a missionary to the nether realms. Alan, for his part, went seeking solace for the loss of his priesthood and the burden that he felt he was to his family. And we'll return to the present day and the present problems of Father Sam next time.